probably the most famous Frenchman in history. Yet Napoleon Bonaparte was born here in Corsica. At the time, the island had belonged to the Republic of Geneva for centuries, but it had just been handed over to the Kingdom of France. The man who became Emperor of the French has always had a colourful, controversial reputation, an image he cultivated himself with the help of art and artists, and it all started here in Ajaccio. Napoleon grew up in this very building. What was once the Bonaparte family residence now receives some 90,000 visitors every year. Now, this museum is the most visited tourist site in Corsica. What is it about Napoleon's childhood home that draws people here?
This is where tourists learn about Napoleon's childhood, through the places he grew up. There are plenty of stories, for example, the little wooden hut he built in the courtyard, so he could get away from his brothers and sisters and study alone. The house has a real presence. It's atmospheric, and I think the tourists who come from all four corners of the world can feel that. And I believe that he was actually born in this room here. Can you tell us a bit about the circumstances of the birth of the future Emperor of the French? In 1835, his mother explains to American journalist Henry Lee that Napoleon was not born on a carpet that depicted the story of the Iliad and the Odyssey, as told by Napoleon on St. Helena and then picked up by Stendhal. In fact, she said there were no carpets in their Corsican homes, especially in summer. Napoleon was born in August.
And I think there's another interesting, mysterious little detail in this house. Can you show me? It's down there, I think.
Yes, it's on the other side. I'll take you there.
If I'm not mistaken, that there is a trap door.
Yes, this is the trapdoor that Napoleon used to escape at the end of his trip to Corsica. He'd finished his campaign in Egypt, he was on the way back, and all his cousins and friends in Ajaccio had come here to see the great man, fresh from his victories in Egypt and Italy. So he placed his hat and his sword on a chair and then discreetly slipped out through that trapdoor and made his way to the port, which is just behind us, to return to Paris to conduct his famous coup of 18 Brumaire.
Le fameux coup d'État du 18 Brumaire.
His legend's built not only on his many military victories, but also the anecdotes surrounding his character, personality, and insatiable work ethic. Writer and historian Philippe Perfettini has spent years researching the man, who he calls a depressive, a punk, and a complex and conflicted hero.
We're at Napoleon's cave. It's named after the future emperor because legend has it that Napoleon came here when he was a child and a teenager to read Plutarch's Parallel Lives. So what does this teach us about his personality? A lot. First, his reclusive character, which became more accentuated over the years as he ascended to power. His love of literature and studying, and it might have been here while reading Plutarch that the spark of ambition in him was ignited. This is the Forcioli Conti Primary School, which in Napoleon's day was the Royal High School. Joseph, his eldest brother, recounts in his memoirs that his younger sibling was a bad loser. During history class, he was placed in the Carthaginians' team against the Romans. Because he refused to lose, he got into a fit of rage, and his mother was forced to come and calm the young Napoleon down. So it seems that from an early age he had that appetite for victory. When Napoleon is in his 20s and stationed in Ajaccio, he goes for a walk in the neighborhood and stumbles upon two clumsy soldiers doing target practice, shooting at a target out in the Gulf. He intervenes and, using his scientific knowledge to work out a technique with a lot of self-assurance so that the cannon is properly positioned for the cannonball to hit the target. What this teaches us about Napoleon, if the story is true, is that he had a real talent for leadership and an innate sense of strategy.
Once crowned emperor in 1804, Napoleon set himself up here in Fontainebleau, outside of Paris. The castle had been home to the kings of France for centuries, and it served as an equally regal residence for a man who put himself centre stage with the help of some of the finest artists of his time. Christophe Béheller, hello. You're an art historian, chief curator here at Fontainebleau. Tell us about why Napoleon chose this site in particular.
Fontainebleau est un lieu où se sont succédés.
Fontainebleau is a place where dynasties succeeded one another. So for Napoleon Bonaparte, the young infantry soldier who gained a scholarship to military school, being able to live in a place steeped in royal history was of course extremely tempting.
C'était évidemment une grande tentation et
this royal palace that shone so brightly during the Renaissance era and under the reign of the Bourbons was chosen by Napoleon as a platform to show off his ascent to power.
2 centuries after his death, Napoleon remains a divisive, somewhat controversial figure, and he was certainly somebody who was interested in communicating around his own image, propaganda even. Tell us about that.
He wanted to make an impact. He did so on the battlefield, and with his pen which acted like a sword, striking the page. These words were printed in the army news bulletins, read by soldiers, while the ones who survived the battle, and by civilians. He fascinated people, and once in power, he understood that the arts could help further his image, and he relied on those he deemed competent.
One painter in particular was key, Jacques-Louis David, for his monumental and grandiose portrait of Napoleon crossing the Alps, as well as the majestic scene of his coronation by Pope Pius VII in the Notre Dame Cathedral, with a little artistic license, since the emperor actually crowned himself without the papal blessing, and his mother Letizia wasn't really in attendance. Later, portraits served to show off different facets of Napoleon's reign and of his personality.
To solidify his status, placing him on an equal footing with the kings of France, he hired artists such as Jacques-Louis David, first painter of the emperor, François Gérard for a portrait of him in coronation attire and for his citizens, Napoleon as sovereign legislator and vigilante by Anne-Louis Giraudet.
And this is a recent hanging, a very important portrait. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
In 1812, David gives to Alexander Douglas, future Duke of Hamilton, a portrait of Napoleon depicting him as a man at work. Leaving his desk at 4 in the morning, he had therefore spent his night working on his civil code, manoeuvring his massive empire. His candle goes out after a night spent working for the benefit of his people. He gets up and goes to review his troops.
And not all the images of Napoleon were totally flattering. There were some sketches, some caricatures that weren't so flattering, especially from the English. How did he manage to control his image within the empire?
Napoleon liked to control his image and to fire counter shots. When English caricaturists tried to hit him where it hurt, for instance pointing their fingers at the scandal of the alleged poisoning of injured French soldiers in Jaffa, well, Bergeret, a French artist, created a vase depicting Napoleon as a miracle worker, healer,
Napoléon.
So he fought fire with fire.
Guérisseur. Donc on répond à l'image par l'image.
When it comes to his architectural ambitions, Napoleon's Arc de Triomphe has definitely stood the test of time. 2 centuries on, it's among France's most iconic monuments. But his personal legacy is a bit more complex, and it's something that contemporary artists are grappling with today. His signature bicorn hat, his famed warhorse, and pompous poses on horseback. Napoleon has been caricatured and parodied to the point where his mere silhouette speaks volumes. Now, at his final resting place, the Invalides, contemporary artists are turning that image on its head, adding voices of dissent to the heroic narrative that surrounds him. Kapwani Kiwanga's installation evokes the flags and regalia of military offensives and their crushing consequences. For Yan Pei-ming, it's the emperor's self-aggrandizing nature as he crowns himself in this revisionist painting. And Ange Leccia's work zooms in on the site of his exile and death, conjuring up the mists of the island of St. Helena.
I wanted to talk about the notion of time, eternity, and how even a figure like Napoleon, well, he's quite insignificant in the grand scheme of things.
2 centuries after his demise, the darker aspects of Napoleon's time in power are being brought to light. In the city of Rouen, the mayor has suggested replacing his statue, prompting controversy here in France. Indeed, Napoleon's law of 1802 effectively restored slavery in the colonies, and last year anti-racist protesters in Martinique tore down a statue of his wife, Joséphine. It's among the most contentious issues in this bicentenary year, as Napoleon's legacy is reappraised.
It was the day George Floyd had been murdered, and one of the artists, Damien de Roubaix, he came back to his studio, and the next morning I had up an image in my cell phone, which was just a portrait of Napoleon with a zip on his mouth and some chains at his feet.
Even the composition of this exhibition has proved divisive. Pascal Convert planned to hang a horse's skeleton above Napoleon's tomb, a nod to the ancient funeral rite of burying members of the cavalry with their horses. Critics, though, deem that disrespectful at a site that should serve as a solemn memorial. A hero for some, a monster for others, Napoleon Bonaparte is certainly a divisive figure. But one thing's undisputed. In his relatively short reign, he shaped the French Republic and its capital like no other leader. The tributes to him then in this bicentenary year are both expansive and eclectic. We'll leave you with a glimpse of what's on offer.
Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith.
Reporting from across West Africa.
All the latest in politics, economics and the arts in Africa on France 24. Our journalists are in every region, every country, to report on the emergence of a continent of unparalleled riches, bringing you Africa's stories on France 24.
Thanks for joining us. Peace again.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.